Hey everyone, I'm Tori Delory and welcome back to Vanlife Unfiltered. Thank you for being here for another Wednesday. Today is super exciting. We are talking about tips for digital nomads when it comes to taxes, which I know doesn't sound like the funnest topic to be talking about, but it is super important. And so I am really excited that we get to talk about it together and talk about some really great ideas of how we can do better when you're talking about paying for taxes, talking about things you can get for deductions when you're talking about taxes. And as always, I'm going to put in now into the comments a free ebook that we do every week, which is super awesome, which means you can get more information. That's if you learn better by listening to podcasts, that's great. You can listen to this on Spotify, or if you do better at reading things, we have ebooks as well. And hi guys, how are you? Thank you for being here. And we're going to be joined by Heather from Tax Queen, and I am so excited for you guys to meet her. So she is actually also a nomad, and she's also a tax professional. So she's going to tell us things that she knows that she's been doing and help, if you have any questions, of course, as always, put them in the little comment box in the corner and we'll be able to, go through those things that you guys are wondering. She also has a wonderful course and a wonderful ebook as well that if you want to look more into taxes as a van lifer, it's a great option to be able to do that. So I'm going to invite her in now and I'm so excited for you guys to meet her. Hi!
Hi. Never done
Very
a live
excited.
before. This is cool. Of course.
So why don't you
Happy
start
to be
with
here.
telling us a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Heather Ryan. I'm an enrolled agent and the owner of Tax Queen. Tax Queen is a firm that supports nomadic entrepreneurs, whether that's van life or just digital nomad, RVers, you name it. If you're a virtual business owner, I support you. And so I support you with tax prep, so tax preparation, bookkeeping. As you mentioned, I do courses and I really believe in education and giving the knowledge so that business owners can really make the best of their business and earn the most money, save for taxes and all that.
And that you were a nomad as well. Are you currently a nomad or were you in the past or how is that for you now?
So my husband and I were 5 years full-time RVing. We are now part-time. So if you can tell my background, I'm actually at home base. So we have a home base in Colorado and we're kind of switching up our travel. So I think that's why we're kind of at home base. We're actually deciding between van life. So turning in our fifth wheel and becoming van life.
What are some of, just out of curiosity, what are some of the things that you're thinking about going from your fifth wheel to van life? What are some of the reasonings behind that?
Ease of travel. We hate how when we're in our fifth wheel, like we have to drive by things that we wish we could stop at, and be able to park places that we can't fit. We love to be boondocking out in the wilderness and the beauty. And sometimes with the fifth wheel, it's just not possible. We're too big, and it's just difficult to get out to the spots. And I
actually hear that a lot as well. So diving a bit more into, what you're doing and how did you get into taxes for digital nomads specifically?
Good question. Well, so when we hit the road, I was already doing taxes for a living, and I kind of had to trust in myself, and I lost a lot of clients by not having an office. And when I started to meet it was younger RVers that were traveling, whether they were families or not, it didn't matter, but people that were having had businesses and were struggling. And I was like, hey, like they're my people. Why don't I just work with them? And so it just kind of clicked and I pivoted and here we are today, I don't know, 6-7 years later. And I'm still loving it. And I get the travel bug.
Great. What are some of the first steps someone should take when they're starting out their taxes?
So really the first thing I say, the basics, is make sure you're recording your income and recording all expenses throughout the year, whether that's using a spreadsheet, whether that's using software like QuickBooks or alternatives. I don't really care how you do it, but as long as you're doing it throughout the year, because if you wait until, like right now, we're in January or February and you're like, oh, it's tax time, I have to figure out what I made last year. I mean, I know I don't remember what I spent money on like last February or last July. And so having to go back and spend hours of frustration. So that's my first thing, is making sure you're doing it throughout the year. And since we are in January, it's kind of the perfect time if you're a business owner, making sure you're organized and starting it from the beginning of the year. So that's my first tip. Hopefully to avoid frustration at tax time. But if you've been doing that, if you've been keeping track of all your income and expenses, it's just gathering all that data, gathering any 1099 docs that are filed. Obviously, those are not due until January 31st, so we're a little early on that. But just being aware of where they might be coming from and who'd be issuing them.
Yeah. When it comes to tracking your expenses, what are some recommendations you give to people of where to track them or be like the most efficient and thorough with tracking?
Sure. I mean, I personally am a big fan of software. A software does the automation. You can connect it to bank accounts. It's way easier to me than manually entering in a spreadsheet. And software, so QuickBooks is probably the most well-known, but there's others. Wave Accounting is something I recommend. It's free, so especially for someone just starting out, making, as a side gig, that there's no extra expense. And I think it's still pretty just as powerful as QuickBooks, especially as a small business owner. But with that said, I do have clients that are very diligent and they keep a really great spreadsheet, and I have no problem with that if that works for you. I just know we're all different and we all have different ways of tracking things and what we like to do and what we don't want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
kind of diving into being a digital nomad specifically, and being a van lifer or living in an RV or a fifth wheel, etc. Let's talk about a little bit about deduction, where people could possibly get deduction wise. I think that's what everyone always is asking is, how can you get deductions with your van, etc. What are some, just starting, it's a very broad question, I know, but just starting out, what are some of your advice on that?
Sure. I mean, advice as far as taking any equipment. So if you use a camera, if you use a computer, all of that counts. Taking internet. So I know when I was on the road, we had 3 different cell phone plans, and just taking a portion of them as far as a business expense. Think about how much you're using it for business and how much it's for personal, and figuring that out, or just taking one plan 100% for business and the other plan is personal kind of thing. So that there's that. The biggest hiccup I think I see is people taking mileage. So people driving 10, 20,000 miles a year in their van or their motorhome or whatever, and thinking that's all business, and it really isn't. Because that's your home, it's your residence. Just because it moves doesn't mean that it's always for business. And I work with my clients on an individual basis, really, because I do have YouTubers, I do, content creators, and I talk to them and I say, okay, well, like, you can't take 15,000 miles. Like, that's a big red flag. And so just working with them. But if you're parked at a campground and you're driving to, like, let's say a national park and you're filming that day, for sure those miles count. So just differentiating, I guess, really what's your personal lifestyle choice, which is really what van life or any of the digital nomad styles is, versus what's actually legitimately for business.
Makes a lot of sense. So I could see that'd be a big, you want to write everything off because you're like, well, technically, to those deductions and writing off mileage, what would you say is a good rule of thumb of this is when you can, anything that you're filming you can write off, or is there like a certain number that you would recommend not going above? Like, what is your advice of not making that giant red flag but still being able to write off as much as you can? Because as someone who does now make money from YouTube, etc., when I'm driving places, most of the time I am gonna film there. So where is if I'm making like a quick video, does that count, or does it have to be a long video, or what would you say for that kind of?
Number one thing is just have a mileage log. And that mileage log can be electronic, that's fine. It can be handwritten, it can be a spreadsheet, but have a mileage log with the purpose of the drive. So was that purpose of the drive to film, or was the purpose of the drive you were moving from point A to point B? And use that as a guide. And I mean, some people say, well, it's not fair because I filmed on my drive day because we had this hiccup and whatever, like we had got a flat tire and I filmed it all. And it's like, but you were moving your home from point A to point B. So just think of it in that terms. And I say having a mileage log because the only way you'd ever defend your mileage deduction before the IRS or even a state is to have that log. They'll throw your mileage right out the window without a log and proof that you did it for business. And it might be a little bit easier for a content creator because you do have video. You have proof, but you still should have a mileage log of where you started, where you ended, you know, what was the purpose of that drive that day. If you were meeting with a client, if you were driving through the whatever state park to film and to share, you know, that's your purpose. So that's really the idea. And I can give an example. Mile IQ is an app, and you can just put it on your phone and it will record every drive you take. And you can, I forget if it's left or right, but one way is if you swipe it's business, and one way if you swipe it's personal. So it's automatically keeping a log. You can put notes into it for the purpose, things like that, but it's recording the day, it's recording the mileage. I think that's a really great tool. And again, automation, things you don't really have to think about. That's, you can tell.
Yeah, actually, that's how I do mine as well. Actually, on QuickBooks, I use QuickBooks, and I do pay for it every month. I believe it's $24 a month, but it does log every single mile that I take. So that's super helpful for me. I think that's how I did so much logging last year. So very helpful, of course, logging all of that.
Yeah, that's a other QuickBooks. I always forget because QuickBooks has not always had a mileage tracker. That's a recent addition in the past year or two. So I forget.
As far as deductions, when would you say you should itemize versus do standard deductions?
Ooh, itemizing, let's just say nowadays is kind of rare. With the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts, which I think went into in 2018, they more than doubled the itemized deductions. And so I'm really seeing anybody itemize. Like it's a rarity. The people that I see is either really high medical expenses, which I hope that people do not have, or high charitable contributions. So someone who's contributing to church on a regular basis, or is just, you know, philanthropic and donates to whatever organizations that they resonate with. Those are probably the two biggest ones. Otherwise, you do itemize if you have the year you buy a van or an RV and you have huge sales tax. Those might be options. I also see single people more likely to be able to itemize because the single standard deduction is lower than the
what is some of your advice you give to someone who has just bought an RV or a van to convert, etc., to be able to get the most out of the taxes, like that tax season?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I don't see a van or RV, motorhome, whatever, as a tax deduction. Like, don't buy it for that. Again, it's a lifestyle choice. And a lot of people want to take a home office deduction. And I'm like, okay, your van is how big? Like, you're going to save $5 on your tax return. And so I don't think it's worth the extra effort and energy. I've worked out of my RV for how many years, and I never took a home office deduction when I lived in the RV full time. So it's just it's not worth the hassle for a $5 savings. But that said, I mean, if you do pay $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 sales tax, I mean, these things are not cheap. And so that might be a time when you might itemize that year. And sometimes I work with my clients. So if they tell me, hey, I bought this expensive vehicle, we'll just use that word, how's that? And it might be like, well, if you donate $500 this year, we can itemize. And so if the person's like, oh, cool, like I can give to my favorite charity or several, charities, and then we can itemize. That's also, those are just things I work with on an individual basis. But otherwise, buying an expensive vehicle doesn't come with added
any benefits or anything. Yeah.
The only difference I will say is if you buy solar and add solar to your home, even if it's a mobile home, you do get a tax credit. So a lot of people will outfit because they want to be off the grid, they want to be boondocking with solar, and the tax credits were just extended through 2032 or something like. It's like another 10 years basically. So yeah. That's an added bonus for someone, even this year, if you plan on.
Yeah, and how do you go about getting that extra deduction that you were talking about, or the credit that you were saying you were getting for the solar? Is that like is it in QuickBooks somewhere? Is it somewhere I can see? Is it an extra form, or how do you get that?
It's an extra form when you file your tax return. It's $56.95 residential energy credits. You just need to have your total of what you spent, and that include paying someone to install it, all the wiring, you know, all of the whole system, the panels, the batteries, the inverters, all of that stuff. I mean, people spend $20,000 on a really big, you know, big oversized, or not necessarily oversized, but decent solar system. So it does save you. It's not refundable, so I will say that. So if you owe taxes that year, if you have a liability, it'll reduce that liability, but you will not get it as a refund. It'll just carry forward.
That makes a lot of sense.
Year.
So kind of going back a little bit, as you were saying, I think a lot of people that I was seeing questions online, when I was like looking up, you know, what are common questions RVers have about taxes, as people were wondering about, you know, can you make your RV a tax deduction for your business? But you were saying that it's not a good idea. So is it not a good idea, or something that people are doing and they shouldn't be doing? Or, you know, how would you, as people who are looking to do that, would you say don't do it? Or would you just say it's not recommended? And kind of, does that make sense?
Hey, don't do it. Again, it's the same thing as if you live in an apartment or a house. Like, you don't get to just take your house as a business deduction. The whole house doesn't count. Even if you work from home, only a portion of it counts. So that's why I usually say don't do it. The exceptions that I've seen, as far as my clients that I've worked with, is someone that maintains a sticks and bricks home, and usually it really does use that van or something to do their business, to do their work, to meet with clients, to get out into the fields or whatever. For sure that would count. And then the other exception I've seen, I know we're talking more about van life, but somebody who has a toy hauler with a garage, that's their studio space or office space or whatever they're doing for work, and then a bunkhouse is the same thing. So if that extra room is set aside for an office, that makes sense to me. It's set aside for business purposes. Other exceptions I've seen is when somebody goes, because you're in a van, maybe it's a small space, your internet isn't reliable, so someone will go and rent space at a co-working space for the day, things like that. If you told me, oh, there's like 4 feet of dedicated space, whatever, I turn my driver's seat around and I have a table and that's where I work from. And it's like, okay, well, 4 feet. There's it's called the simplified deduction for the home office, and it's $5 a square foot. So 4 feet times 5 is 20 feet. Like, it's just not, it's $20 deduction. And you think about that, like if your taxes are 10%, like what are you saving? You know, like do the math. So that's why I say it's really not worth it. But that's when I say toy haulers and things like that have a little more space or someone that has a home base.
What are some of when you speak to a new digital nomad who's coming to work with you, what are some of the common questions or concerns that they have that they're trying to figure out? What are just some of the common questions you get?
We've covered some of them. mileage and that home office, like taking their RV, depreciating the RV being owned by the business, things like that. Those are probably the top questions that I get. And then just understanding all the deductions that they can take, and we've kind of covered some of those.
I would love if you could kind of talk a bit more about, for anyone listening now, listening on the podcast, etc., where can they find you? What courses, you know, and you have a course as well as an ebook. Just kind of talking about where they can find you and be able to get more help if they need that.
Sure. So my website is tax-queen.com. That's probably the easiest way to get all the information that I have out there. And then I am releasing courses. I have one out right now, and I'm releasing them this year, probably in May after tax season. And it's a whole course of basically just how to run your business, how to get started, how to deal with the finances, what is an S Corp, like answering all of those questions. And that is nomadpreneur.life. And you can actually find it through my website, tax-queen. So they're kind of connected. But yeah. So stay tuned for that.
That's great. It seems like you're doing a lot of new things and adding a lot of things to your website. So I'm very excited to see that. And, but yeah, I think anything else that you want to add, that you want to talk about? Someone said LLC. Would you, I guess, question-wise, would you suggest people getting an LLC? They're starting business, I guess is kind of their question, I'm assuming, is for like someone who's a digital nomad, should they get an LLC or go more like sole proprietor, I guess is probably the question they're asking.
Sure. Actually, that's the other common question I get is, I have an LLC, now what do I do? Or what does that mean really? Because it's a misunderstood term maybe. So LLC is just a state level registration. If you're a single member LLC, then you're still a sole proprietor for tax purposes. So I'll just clarify that, because that is like my number tough question there as far as business owners. If you have multiple people in an LLC, so that's either with your friends, your colleagues, even with a spouse, you are a partnership. So you have a separate tax return. So that's really the two LLCs.
When it comes to picking an LLC versus like the sole proprietorship, etc., what would you recommend for like a digital nomad?
There's no one like right way. An LLC is just starting to separate you as far as like business versus personal assets. So if you have assets to protect, the LLC is the first level of protection. And I have plenty of people that operate just under a legal name or like a DBA, doing business as, and they're just a sole proprietor and it works for them. And then others that choose the LLC option and it's still a sole proprietor.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying if you have things you want to protect or have concerns legally, that's when you would go towards the LLC. So that sounds like something else someone would do when they're just starting out, trying to figure out, so you get your EIN, you get your either LLC or proprietorship, sole proprietorship, whichever way you're looking. Besides, those two things, what else would someone else be looking at when they're starting out? Just really starting out, their bare basics.
Those are the two biggest ones. And then again, just setting things up, knowing bookkeeping and like how to track all of that, income, expenses.
Is there anything else that you can think of that you would like to add or tell anyone who's listening? I think we appreciate you sharing all that information, and I'm sure it helped a lot of people. And it was really great talking to you, and getting to talk to someone who is a nomad and who does travel and has that bug, but also helping a lot of people with this niche that you have.
No, it's fun. It's my passion. What can I say?
Time, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Again, we can find you at Tax Queen. Your Instagram's gonna be linked with this post. And so if anyone else wants additional help, they can find you and contact you and be able to get more help. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.